As many of you may know, I'm an artist, and aside from making quilts and masks and sewing, I do all different kinds of artwork. And you may have seen a few mannequins or statues that I've made out of clay. The mannequins have been used for the face masks recently, and I needed one for children's face masks aged 6 to 9 years. So I'm doing a couple of things right now. I want to talk a little bit about this and how you can have a mannequin without spending an awful lot of money. But also, I'm trying out a new computer and video software, and we'll see if I can splice these steps together. This is about the most economical way to buy a mannequin head. This was $10. And this particular one, now they labeled it as a 4-year-old, but it's too big for a 4-year-old. If you go online on Google and search for average head circumference, you'll find charts that show you about, and I think this one is like 16.5, which puts it more at like a 6-year-old than a 4-year-old. So you want to do that first so that you know what size you're really looking for. But this is hollow and has a hole there, and the reason they sell these separately, because if you have a full body mannequin, it would, out of the neck, have a piece of wire sticking up that the head would sit on the full body. So for $10 you can buy just the head, and then what you would have to do is make your own support structure. This is, believe it or not, a peat pot, a flower pot, and this is armature wire from Dick Blick. And I have a few choices as to the way to make this neck structure that I'm going to put the head on. One is clay, and I use either Roma Plastilina or Van Aken is an American company that makes an oil-based modeling clay that never hardens. And once you could probably use an old coat hanger. It would be harder to bend, but you could probably use an old coat hanger for that, and any kind of a flower pot to give yourself a base to build this on. If you buy an armature, this is called an armature, if you buy one just like this, which is a flower pot and wire, they're about $26. So obviously this is much less expensive. So the first option is clay, because I make clay statues. I have to fix my bird bath, so I had to order Quikrete, which is concrete that sets quickly, and I could still even make this out of cement. And if I do it out of either clay or cement, I would leave a little bit of the wire sticking up so that the wire could be shaped to fit inside the hole and the head would fit securely. The third option is paper mache. A bunch of newspaper you cut into strips, flour, about a cup of flour to start with, add water to it until it's pasty. Make a big enough batch of it so that your strips of paper can be put in the bucket or the dish or large bowl with the paste. Stick them in there, let them get saturated, and then, so this is a little floppy. The first thing I'll do is start and go this way and keep the wire in place. I'll probably put a whole layer of paper mache on this, shape it the way I want it to hold the head, and then let that dry for about 2 hours and come back and do it again. Now, you can get Roma Plastilina clay and the Van Aken clay in either a peach or Roma Plastilina comes in white. I usually buy gray-green. You can't paint that, so that's an idea that you need to keep in mind. Excuse me. Cement I could paint with acrylic, but paper mache I can sand it down when it's fully dry, make it smooth, and then paint that. And it depends on how professional looking you want your mannequin. If I wanted this to be a professional mannequin like my large mannequin, I would probably do the whole thing in clay. And I wouldn't just be putting the head on top of an armature. I would be completely shaping a neck to fit the head. But what I'm going to kind of do that, but not really. This is going to be, I'm going to be able to just take the head off of there and pack this away that way if I want to. Excuse me, it's pollen, pine pollen is out. But if you want to make it more permanent, then you would cover this top hook and shape this top to exactly fit the hole in the top. And probably make it exactly that size and shape so that this fits very securely on there. I don't need it to do that. So there are some first options and material, and you can tell this was in the basement from last year's plants, and I did think of a few other things. I had to buy cases of commercial toilet paper that, you know, when you go into like an airport bathroom or something, they come in a huge roll that fits in this huge container. One of those is about this wide. So with the pandemic, a lot of us have had to buy supplies differently. Normal supplies, you may be able to use some of those for art projects. So the next step I'll be doing is layering the paper mache onto the armature. Okay, this is 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. And this is the consistency of the paste for the paper mache. So I'm going to cut a bunch of strips, and you can make it just a little bit thinner than this, but on the first layers that are going on the armature there, I don't mind if it's thick because the flour will add a little bit of strength, and I can make it thinner with top layers, but I'm going to cut maybe 50 or 60 strips of paper about 1.5 inches wide and stick them in here and let them get saturated with this. You can also just pick it up like this and rub it over the paper to get them saturated, and then start layering them on your armature. Now here's another option to think about when you're doing this, which I may end up, I haven't decided yet. I may sand the finish down on this and then paint it with acrylic paint. But the other thing that you can do, if you don't want to buy a resin or plastic head, and you want more along the ideas of a wig stand or a hat stand, what you can do is, and I'll probably come up with some kind of a pattern for it. You can make a stuffed head out of muslin, an egg shape, stuff it with muslin, and use that as your, to replace the plastic mannequin head, and you can still make it according to your dimensions of the size that you want. But by making it out of muslin, you may already have the muslin and the stuffing, and that will work just as well for hats, wigs. You'll have to maybe shape the face if you want it for face masks. This is going to need to dry for a couple of hours at least. And the first layer here, and this rips easily if you want to shape it, the first layer here is really about keeping the wire from moving. So this is where we want the thicker paste, and we want to make sure that however we end up finishing this, that the wire armature is not going to move back and forth. So whether you make a muslin head or whether you use a plastic head, the other thing I can do with this is instead of painting it with acrylic paint, I can cover it with muslin. And then we'd have the plastic head that you saw with a muslin covered neck and upper chest area. And depending on whether you need something washable or not, so if I do that, it would be more difficult to wash off or disinfect, but it's an option. And it depends if you're going to have it displayed or whether you want to keep it in storage until you make a fancy hat and use it just to display a hat. It depends on what you want to use it for. So you can see this paste is very thick. And we just want to keep adding layers right now around the bottom of the wire, because I just don't want that wire to be moving in any way. This is a really good project for kids to make models if they want to make superhero models or princess models. If your kids are still stuck in the house with COVID shutdowns and stuff. It's fun, it's messy, it's a good arts and crafts day for any age, really. This is fun. This is how I'm relieving the stress from making kids masks. And I have to say that that was much more stressful than I expected. You know, I just kind of go along with my life, and then all of a sudden I realized that nobody was giving the kids masks. So this is a wonderful way to relieve any kind of stress or anxiety or anything like that. It's like playing in the mud, only you're going to end up with something wonderful when you're done. So I'm going to leave it like that for now, and I will later on keep adding layers to this until I get this built up the way I want to. I went a little bit further than I had initially planned with this first layer, but I wanted to use up the paste and the paper that I had already started. And it's good to do this on a plate. So that's where I am, and you would almost say that this could be done as far as the shape needed. But now, because I added more than I had planned, it's going to take longer to dry. And any of these loose lumps, I can just sand off. This will sand off very easily later. So there is a basic shape that is going to work. Now, but now I have to let it dry, and I can just show you. And we're hoping the whole thing doesn't collapse. So do you see how that is good enough to give the idea? So now, if I wanted to, I can buy multiple resin heads for $10 a piece, and I have a stand to put them on. Now, if I want to build it up more and make it more like my other professional mannequin, where I would be building up more of the neck, I would put the head up higher. But I think I can use this as a headstand. And as long as that top wire is going to be secure enough, I can stick any head on this. And so what I'll be doing with the paper mache is sanding it down and either painting it or covering it with muslin. So not very difficult, not very expensive, and in my case I'll be able to use it for multiple heads if I buy more of these. It has been about 2 full days since I made the stand in paper mache. Because it was so thick and very wet, it took a couple of days to fully dry. It is now hard. It still needs a little bit of drying up here, but the next step is just sanding it down. I've decided I'm not going to paint it, simply because it doesn't really look like a sculpture of a human body or anything like that. So I personally would rather leave it like this, so it's very obviously just a stand to hold a head. But I may cover it with muslin, and depending on what I want to use it for or what I need to photograph or something like that. Very easy to make, and this will work wonderfully for any resin head. Now, I have face masks made to fit this size, so with what I'm currently doing, this is perfect, because all I really need is the photo of the face mask and how it would fit, in this case, a child. Now, the head sits down quite a bit, and that's why I'm not going to paint it, because it doesn't look like her neck. Her neck would be thinner than that, a little bit. If I want to use it for other resin heads, that might sit higher up. So for me, this is going to work perfect, and it's so easy to do. Now, I have a pattern coming up where I actually make, it's a large egg shape, and I make it out of a certain kind of yarn and then wash it and shrink it. So you have two options of how to make a hat stand type head. You can either do it, that particular one is knitted on a round loom and just stuffed, or you can do it out of muslin by just taking a square of fabric, gathering it up like in a pumpkin shape or an egg shape, and stuffing it. You would, if you think of a bandana and putting a bunch of, I don't know, apples in the bandana and then tying the four corners, you would be doing the same type of thing with muslin, only put stuffing in there to get an egg shape if you wanted to make a hat stand like this. But this video has been about making the basic structure that you can now build on, decorate, paint, sand, do anything with.